I intended for my first video on Scratches to be a one and done. The purpose of that video was to dissect and explain how the game managed to be so scary without the use of cheap tactics, not to retell the entirety of the game's story. But no sooner than I published that video, the comments section persuaded me that part 2 would be a good idea. Not just to give closure to those of you out there who are terribly curious about this game, but won't play it for one reason or another, but also because some of the events in the second half of this game, and the discussion surrounding them, have turned me into a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist. So, here is the second and final video on Scratches, in which we will play out the rest of the game together, examine all 3 different conclusions, and even explore several theories attached to the game's events and endings. Before we go in, we have a couple items of housekeeping to tend to. I actually had the privilege of interviewing Augustin Cordes last week, the lead developer and programmer for Scratches, and the full unedited interview will be going up on this channel at the same time this video does. Of course, I recommend watching this video first, because that interview does go into explicit spoilers about Scratches, but before you even watch this video, I would like to make one last appeal to you that you should go out and play Scratches yourself. If the thing that's stopping you is not enjoying horror games, then by all means, don't play it. But if your scruples come from the piracy aspect of acquiring Scratches, then allow Mr. Cordes himself to put your conscience at ease.
By all means, go to whatever, an abandonware site or archive.org. Download the game by any means you can. I'd rather see more people playing the game than making money.
To reiterate, Augustin encourages his game to be played by any means necessary. All he asks in return is that you wishlist his upcoming game, Asylum, on Steam. So again, if you'd like the privilege of solving the mystery of the Blackwoods yourself, there is a link in the description. All you'll need is Windows and WinRAR, if even that. Second and final. Before we go in, you guys are going to have to make a promise to me that you're going to be good stewards of this game's community, and keep its twists and turns secret from new players. In the wake of the first video, I began to realize that part of Scratch's charm is built off the mystery of the game itself. I'll let another reviewer by the name of Painticus spell it out, as he was the one who first turned me on to the idea.
There's something oddly poetic about it being removed from storefronts. It's now some hidden relic of what horror can be. The game makes several references to books like the Necronomicon, De Vermis Mysteriis, and in an odd twist of fate, Scratches has become a video game equivalent to one of these. A dark secret only to be found by a few.
A video essay like my first one, now somehow climbing over 100,000 views, puts a lot of sunlight on this game. Sunlight which I worry could age and damage it. This is why I took care in that video to avoid spoilers pertaining to the second half. A game like this isn't just made, it is grown. It isn't just the product of 4 years of development, but 18 years of speculation and whispers. And while we're all very curious to know more about it, it's important that we don't spoil the fun for future mystery and horror enthusiasts who have the extreme pleasure of stumbling across this game. So again, if you know someone who would enjoy Scratches, then recommend it to them. If you are a content creator and would like to make a video on it yourself, then I encourage you to do so as well. I do not have a monopoly on talking about this game, and by all means, if you'd rather play this game for yourself than have my curated experience solve the mystery for you, there is a link to a download that will cost you nothing in the description. But please, 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 treat this fantastic, disadvantaged horror story with the respect that I showed it in part 1. Avoid openly speaking of spoilers, and instead continue to pay it forward. Let as many people as possible experience Scratches for themselves.
Keep it secret. Keep it safe.
So, without any more delay, let's pick up right where we left off. Oh, that's right. It is the dead of the night, we just awoke from a startling nightmare, and that scratching is sounding from the depths of the house again. And now here we are, lantern in hand, at the top of the basement steps. Shall we continue? Michael strikes a match, one of 4 left in his little matchbook, and lights the lantern. The light is helpful, but sends flickering shadows up and down the wall, filling our peripherals with inklings of movement which do not inspire ease. The sounds are coming from the far wall, over by the furnace. It sounds almost like they're muffled, hiding behind something. Is there something behind the furnace? Or could it be? After watching him rappel out of a window in the rain, I've come to expect that Michael Arthate has no sense of self-preservation whatsoever. But dear God, You must have a death wish to crawl inside a furnace like this. I've never seen the inside of a furnace before. It looks like an old Soviet space shuttle, decommissioned and decrepit, and cluttered with devices I don't know the functions of. The flickering lantern will only illuminate as far as the little light will allow. But there's something at the end, at the far wall. What is that? A door? Another one? I get that James Blackwood was a structural engineer, but isn't 3 secret rooms enough? And while the other doors we found were simply boarded up or wallpapered over, there's something about this one which is especially uninviting. Wooden frame and bars on the windows make... I backpedal out of the furnace as quickly and quietly as such a thing can be done, and shut the infernal grate behind me. Someone is inside the house. What do we do? All we've got is a knife and a lantern that's out of oil now, and it's the dead of night, and is Jerry awake? Can we call Jerry, please? The last drop of oil inside the lamp had been consumed. Okay, what now? I was too confused to think straight, and decided, almost reluctantly, to return to bed. Seriously? You're going to go to sleep after that? I hate to say it, but what else is there to do right now? Lie awake in bed and listen for more scratching noises? There aren't any now, at least, and I'm going to headcanon that I locked that door to the basement on the way up the stairs. With nothing else to do, and sleeping on eggshells, Michael crawls back into bed. I hate Mondays. Michael's narration sets the stage. My third and final day inside the Blackwood house began with an odd feeling of expectation. Still shaken about the occurrences of last night, I managed to pull myself together and focus on finding out what really happened in this place. Third and final day. Really? I hadn't realized things were coming to a close so quickly. There's still so many questions, an unreal amount of questions. Is the game really going to answer everything in this one final day? As I walked down the crescent staircase into the foyer, Michael remarked about how cold the house had become. He moseys over to the hearth, strikes one of the 3 remaining matches he has, and starts a fire from the bundle of logs that had been left in the fireplace for God knows how long. Much better. Now that Michael's feeling good and warm and cozy, he will waste no time in phoning Jerry and telling him about last night's events. Jerry, man, you gotta hear this shit. Even though he previously killed his car battery and crawled headfirst into a furnace, Michael is the antithetical horror movie protagonist here. He cuts to the chase and tells Jerry,
Last night I saw something down below. It was moving. I wasn't dreaming, and I'm not making this up.
Are you sure it wasn't a mutant rat?
Definitely no rat.
I'm calling the police.
No, not just yet.
Michael, for Christ's sake, you could have a burglar inside the house.
This is no burglar, Jerry. It's much more interesting than that, and I want to figure this out by myself.
Jerry hits us with a whatever, seemingly becoming more disbelieving of our story. It's not like Michael makes up scary things for a living. He hangs up, and we're now turned loose on the house. Now that the rain is lifted, we are able to explore the grounds and some of the adjunct buildings on the property. We had the same privilege on day 1, which I glossed over, as the crypt, chapel, and greenhouse are all tightly closed by some device or another. Then on day 2, we actually did find a key in the studio upstairs, a thing which I forgot to point out in my first video. We don't know what it opens, but I've got my fingers crossed for the chapel or greenhouse. Luckily, it can't open the crypt, which I was not keen on visiting, seeing as the door to it has been binded shut with some kind of wire, a security measure which I now realize seems just as improvised as it is concerning. Oh, never mind. Looks like the key opens the shed. A strong smell of aged oil was infecting the barn-like garage. Oh, really? I love that smell. I noticed the tool shed when I first arrived at the house on day 1, but had quickly forgotten all about it. Inside is an interesting slew of junk. Overturned oil drums, a car that looks like it could be in a museum today, a bicycle with a interesting device attached to it. Looks like a headlamp that's being powered by the pedals. Wish I had one of those. But luckily, there are some tools in here which will aid our progression. Of the various shit scattered across the bench, only the toolbox on the far left had some useful items. Fingers crossed for a 38 snubby. Looks like we have a pry bar, a screwdriver, certainly won't say no to that, along with a pair of wire cutters. Clearly the game has an opinion on where it would like me to go next. Out the back door attached to the kitchen, There's a winding path which snakes through the foliage all the way to an abandoned mausoleum. Sure enough, a couple snips of the wire cutters do away with the improvised lock. What could be in here that required such a hasty barrier? A cold shiver ran down my spine as I entered the decaying crypt. The foul smell of rotting flesh seemed to have persisted through the years. Oh, I don't love that smell. Oh shit, there's a basement. Putting aside whatever might be below, there were 2 coffins in the front of the room sitting on a pedestal. The placard before the altar read, James Blackwood and Catherine Blackwood, both having died in 1963. One, allegedly, by the other's hand. Michael gives a word of warning as he prepares to open the first coffin. Then he lifts the cover wide, and inside is a skeleton. Michael rises a step, and then does the same to the other coffin. And inside he finds... Curious enough, this coffin was empty. Hold it right there. And then it occurred to me that until we had found this coffin with his name on it, we had never learned James Blackwood's cause of death, or that he had even died in the first place. Does that mean...
I have to make a call.
Early on in day 2, do you remember that safe we opened behind the painting in Mrs. Blackwood's room? Well, the key to the studio may have not been the only item of interest inside it. Hiding at the bottom of the deed to the house is a small print, easily overlooked phone number for Mr. Blackwood's bank and financier. The phone downstairs has Jerry and Barbara, our assistant, on speed dial, but it also has the option to dial out to other numbers. I wonder...
Good day, the National Bank of Northumberland. Robert Blake speaking.
Hello, Robert. I need some help.
We have actual dialogue options now. Ask about Christopher Milton or James. You only get one choice per playthrough. I'm gonna have to ask about Blackwood.
It's about James Thomas Blackwood. Do you have a customer called that?
The man on the phone tries to stonewall us and says he can't give out that information, but Michael is craftier than that. We now have the option to either impersonate Christopher Milton or Chief William Bailey, who oversaw the murder investigation in 1963. I went with the option I knew best.
My name is Christopher Milton, a renowned doctor and good friend of the Blackwood family, and I demand some respect.
All right, sir. Please, just hold on for a few moments.
My god, that actually worked.
Ah, yes. I have a customer listed as James Blackwood here.
I had the opportunity to ask Blake about the construction during the 1960s or recent activity in the house. I chose recent activity. But Blake told us he could only give that information to one person, and that was James Blackwood himself.
So that means the account is still active?
Well, yeah. It means I can't give you this information, sir. You said your name was...
I won't waste your time anymore. Good day.
Jerry, pick up the phone. I figured it out.
And I think I know the identity of my intruder.
Tell me, who is it?
James Blackwood.
The Blackwood person? Michael, are you serious? That the ghost of the murderer is roaming the house?
I'm not talking about his ghost, Jerry. I'm talking about him.
What the heck do you mean?
I mean James Blackwood himself, alive in this house.
What? How is that possible?
Jerry does not believe us and even tries to destroy us with facts and logic, which only prompts Michael to drop the bomb on him.
Jerry, just listen to me. I know I'm right. There's only Mrs. Blackwood's body in the crypt. His is missing.
Oh God, Michael. You've really gone out of your mind. Digging into coffins, what next? Desecrating the chapel?
This is why history will forget you, Jerry.
Whatever it takes to solve this mystery. You can only find stories like this in books.
Precisely why I'm beginning to wonder about your sanity.
You'll see.
So that's it then. Michael doesn't want the police involved because he's having too much fun playing detective. I can relate. Still, the whole James Blackwood dying in 1963 thing does put a damper on our working theory. I wonder if we can find something about that in the archives upstairs. Ah, here it is. Following the shocking news, sinister outcome of the story, Mr. James Blackwood has died at age 56 from a heart attack allegedly due to the stress of being accused as a murderer. Right, a heart attack. Dr. Milton is said to be taking care of a funeral that nobody will attend, and that all the belongings of the Blackwood family are now in his possession. I wonder if Dr. Milton's signature is also on that death certificate. Wait a second. Hastily scrawled at the bottom of the paper is a phone number in what I can only assume is Milton's own handwriting. It's labeled Bailey. Bailey is the chief of police who we just had the option to impersonate on the phone. Judging by the quote he gave to the paper, it seems that he was absolutely vindictive that James had been behind Catherine's death, and was infuriated that he never stood trial and saw justice. Looks to me like we've got some more journalism to conduct. I gave the number a call, and met with a man who sounded terribly ill and terribly grumpy. He's William Bailey, all right, the former police chief of Rothbury. Michael goes right into lying mode and claims to be a journalist working for the Rothbury paper. He wastes no time in jumping to the famous, or rather infamous, Blackwood murders. Bailey somehow becomes even more irritated, saying he's talked about this shit over and over with the press, even into his retirement. Still, we squeeze him for a bit of conversation on the matter. Bailey corroborates what we've heard, that the maid witnessed Blackwood hiding the body, that Blackwood used his wealth and influence to avoid the authorities, and that he ultimately died of a heart attack shortly after the accusation. He even calls Christopher Milton a slimy worm, and says that he was investigating him and his involvement for years, but could never pin anything on him. Bailey and Michael both agree that James was guilty, but we don't agree on the motive. Michael insists that James must have had a motive, that all murders have a motive. This is Michael thinking like a writer. Bailey, instead, suggests that psychopaths don't need motive, and that's exactly what James was.
There's got to be something else. I can't believe Blackwood flipped just like that one sunny day. It doesn't make any sense.
People flip, son. You could be flipping right now without knowing it.
But then we learn something new, when Michael asks about how Blackwood reacted when the police pulled his wife's body from the garden.
I beg your pardon.
I mean Catherine Blackwood's body when you dug in the garden of the manor.
Like I said, they hampered the investigation. We never managed to set one foot inside the manor. What kind of bloody journalist are you, son?
But are you telling you never actually retrieved the body?
That's exactly what I'm telling you. Now, if you don't mind.
But wait, this doesn't make any sense.
Stop wasting my time, damn it. I was enjoying my retirement until you had the brilliant idea of calling me. I don't want to hear anything else about this case ever again.
Please, Mr. Bailey, don't...
Leave me alone.
If what Bailey said about Mrs. Blackwood's body never having been recovered was true, then whose body did I see in the crypt? Things were beginning to feel supernatural again. I returned to the crypt and opened that coffin again with a lesser degree of reverence than before. I wanted to have a better look at the clothes to see if they could help me better identify the gender of the deceased, but the corpse had been shrouded in what looked like an androgynous burlap sack. Short of measuring hip bones, there was no way to tell if I was looking at the remains of Catherine or James or a Party City decoration. Frustrated, I began to wonder about what Bailey had said, and oh my god, that's right, there's a basement here. The lower story of the mausoleum fit inside the footprint of the room above. The walls were lined with coffins, and it was so dark down there that I couldn't even make out their placards. I had no way of knowing who any of these dead were, if not just the lost and immemorial relatives of the Blackwood clan. Except for one. A coffin which was tragically smaller than all of the rest. You couldn't pay me to open that one. According to the grandfather clock, it is already coming up on noon. If this is to be our last day at Blackwood Manor, then we'd better pick up the pace. So far, all I've done is build one theory that James Blackwood is somewhere in the house, and then shortly thereafter, I poked a giant hole in it. Out of keys, I went out to the greenhouse just to see if something might have changed between days 1 and 3, which might have been worth observing. Trying the door again, I then realized that it wasn't locked, but had just rusted shut after years of being exposed to the elements. With a few drops of oil, it shrieked open. Love me a good greenhouse. Not loving the soundtrack as much, though. It's a simple place. One large, dying tree sits in the middle of the greenhouse, guarded by a drain. I can't help but see the macabre irony attached to this forsaken tree, seeing as it's the only tree in this dense forest with a roof over its head, ensuring it will never drink again. A rickety old railing wraps around the second floor. On this balcony, there was a flower bed with a shovel sticking out of it. I thought of Mrs. Blackwood, who was alleged to still be buried somewhere in that mess of a garden. I tried to pull it from the flower bed, but apparently it was encased in cement, as Michael said it was entirely too difficult to pull it from the soil. Michael's kind of a wimp. On the far end of the balcony was a little potted plant with sharp green leaves and thick red berries. It almost looks like holly or mistletoe. And funny enough, it's the only thing in the greenhouse which bears some semblance of life. I've got my eye on you, plant. All the puzzles in the greenhouse revolve around getting some water to flow. We need the hose to loosen the soil and unearth the shovel, but when we go to screw the faucet and turn the water on, nothing happens. The water release in the basement. Maybe that valve just needs a twist. On my way away from the faucet, I noticed one last item of interest in the greenhouse. Something shiny stuck in the gutter. But I couldn't undo the grate, not even with the help of the screwdriver. Once again, water would have to be the solution. The basement remained a place that I was very not comfortable visiting for long periods of time. I'm sure it was no coincidence that they put the water release valve on the south wall, making it so that in order to operate the thing, you must turn your back to the monstrous furnace. Brittlebones Michael can't turn the valve with just his hands, so he runs it through with a pry bar he found in the garage, and then strikes it with a hammer. A couple whacks, and then... that ought to restore the water flow to the greenhouse. The functioning hose helps us to free the shovel from the clutches of the tightly packed soil. Then, in regards to the shiny in the duct below, I unscrewed the hose and let the faucet run into the gutter. The hurrying water carried the glimmer away, down the waterway and out of the greenhouse. Well, that certainly moved the thing, but to where? A diverging path between the greenhouse and the main house leads us to a curious little pond at the foot of a gnarled old tree. The game actually requires the player to wait a few minutes for the water to do its thing, but this is ultimately where the faucet will take the shiny object. Once it arrives in the puddle, Michael can collect his reward. You guessed it. It's a key. But once I crossed the garden and made my way to the chapel, I was surprised to find that this key did not fit. Come to think of it, it's entirely too small to open any sort of door. So what, pray tell, does it unlock? The drawer on Blackwood's desk. I knew I encountered a locked drawer somewhere, but had forgotten where. Now that I tracked it down, I was another major step closer to solving this mystery. What was so important to James Blackwood that he locked it in a drawer and hid the key in the gutter of a greenhouse? First, there's a letter written from Christopher Milton to Catherine, the year that she was killed. It begins with, "I beg you to take the utmost care in order to keep this letter away from James. I don't like to think of the mental breakdown he would suffer if he reads this." Seeing as the letter is in James' desk, we can surmise that she failed in obliging Milton's request. Christopher Milton then starts dropping bombs on Catherine left and right. He says that James is becoming obsessed with the idea that he's cursed, and so far Milton has succeeded in pretending to believe James and go along with it. But now James is asking Milton to help him perform, quote, "an African ritual on that awful mask he brought, convinced he released an ancient spirit which will harm everyone he loves and cares for. My biggest fear is that I will end up losing my own mind along with his. I have to put an end to all of this." I took these revelations as the biggest takeaway here, but really, there is another insight in this letter that deserves mentioning here. The next paragraph reads, "And about that other issue, you should know that I have gotten over it. Catherine, what we all did 2 years ago, the decision we made and knew would affect the course of our lives, has been haunting my sleep ever since then. I know you must be the one more affected by this, but you wouldn't understand all that has been going through my head. The confusion, the contradiction. Now more than ever, I'm not sure whether it was the right decision or not. But there's no turning back, and we must face the consequences." What we all did 2 years ago? Face the consequences? What are these two talking about? James has had a monopoly on the conspiracies and scheming in this game, so what is this dark secret that Catherine and Milton are in on together? Before encouraging her to destroy this letter, Milton leaves Catherine with a word of assurance. "You have my word, I won't ever reveal anything." That's good and cryptic, but what else does James keep locked away in his desk? A lockbox with a 5-digit combination. Considerably more difficult to guess than a 4-digit. Here is where scratches will come to a screeching halt. Opening this box is now the most important thing in the game, which must be done to continue. But what could be the solution? This game hasn't opted for the lazy route of finding a 5-digit number scrawled upon a post-it note somewhere. And we also don't have any reference in any document anywhere which refers to a combination lock of any kind. Stumped as all hell, I did what I normally do first when the game throws a curveball at me, and I called Jerry to see if he might have heard about any other combinations left behind in the house. But Jerry cut me off in the middle of my question.
Well, let's suppose you're right, and James Blackwood is indeed hiding somewhere inside the house. He's a madman, a murderer, and your life could be in danger.
Why the sudden change of heart? You're the one who sent me to this murder house, Jerry.
I'm willing to take that risk. He surely knows I'm here by now. What if he's waiting for me to leave so that he can escape? I can't miss this opportunity.
The opportunity of what, for Christ's sake?
Of knowing. I'm already too much into this, Jerry. And if I don't know what happened inside this house, I won't be able to sleep again.
You're obsessed. You were supposed to finish your book, get some rest, and now look at this. What are you going to say to your editor?
Who knows, maybe this whole episode inspires me to write that ending. I'm sorry. I can't leave this now, Jerry. It's too late.
I can't believe this. I don't understand you.
Michael is unfazed, and he won't leave this house until he knows what really happened here.
Doesn't the possibility of spending another night in that house with a creepy old man hiding in the basement scare you?
I know what you're trying to do. Goodbye, Jerry.
Michael? Michael! It's dangerous, do you hear me? Dangerous! You have to leave that place!
I'll keep you informed.
This is the last time we will speak to Jerry, and for good reason. Outside in the mailbox, a new letter has arrived. It is a notice of eviction. Due to irregularities during its acquisition process carried over by Mr. Jerry P. Carter, you are to immediately leave the property known as Blackwood Manor. Jerry, you lying bastard. That's why he wanted us to leave. He didn't actually close the deal on the place, and it looks like somebody noticed. We never learned the specifics of just what Jerry did, but the government wasn't so fond of it. So, by their order, we must now vacate the property as soon as possible. In an earnest attempt to make good on the letter and stay on the right side of the law, Michael comes to another MacGyver solution of starting his car. He removes the battery and carries it out to that weird bicycle apparatus in the garage that we saw earlier. Positive goes on negative, or something like that, and then he hops on the seat, pedaling up the battery and manually recharging it. Lo and behold, it works. The car turns on, and Michael sits behind the wheel and ponders his departure. As I prepared to leave the manor, I suddenly felt responsible for disturbing the forces that had up to now lain dormant inside the house. I had to do something. Is that how it's going to be then? Under penalty of law, possibly even death, Michael will continue his investigation. And the one thing that stands in his way is the locked box in James's drawer. Do you guys remember how I went on a tangent in that first video over a puzzle I found to be nonsensical and needless? Truthfully, that was just me airing frustration for this puzzle, which I never thought I would get the chance to discuss in a long format like this. This is a puzzle which challenges the definition of puzzle. This is a puzzle that would have taken me days to piece together without the help of a guide. This is some of the most cutthroat, soul-crushingly narrow detective work I've ever seen a game ask of the player, and that's after you factor out some of the illogical, downright stupid mechanical applications to the puzzle. And if you manage to solve this thing without the help of a guide, no matter how long it took you, you have earned my infinite respect and admiration. Seriously, the Black Ops 4 Blood of the Dead Easter egg was easier to figure out than this. I'll begin by generously telling you the ends which we are trying to achieve here, because the game won't. The combination to this box is the name of the Blackwood's stillborn child. But not only do we not know the name of this child, we can also be fairly certain that his or her name isn't a slew of numbers, because its dad wasn't Elon Musk. So the first step is to discover the name of Blackwood's child, and the second step is to figure out how to transpose that name into numbers. Shall we begin? The birth certificate in the condemned nursery has been totally inked out. Not even one letter of the presumably 5-letter name is visible. But there's another place we can go to hopefully shed some light on the name of Blackwood's late child, and that is the crypt where he or she was buried. But you will, of course, recall that it was too dark in the basement to make out any of the ledgers, and Michael, with 2 matches to spare, is too much of a skinflint to use either of them to illuminate the underbelly of the mausoleum. Funny enough, 2 matches is exactly how many we'll need to beat the game. It's almost as if Michael knows this. The lantern is conveniently out of oil, there's no hope of finding so much as another drop, and there's not a damn candle anywhere in a 5-mile radius. So how, dear player, are you going to illuminate the dark depths of this crypt? The answer may shock you. Players are often not in the habit of looking up. They should when given the opportunity. Lots of great things in that direction. When you look up at the ceiling of the mausoleum, you will find a fancy, stained dome window that lets some faint light down into the damp, foul-smelling grave. Step 1 is to get some fresh air in here. Conveniently located on the ground, kicked into a corner, is a pebble of utmost importance. No other pebble will do, you must take this one. Michael takes aim at the ceiling, winds up, and hurls it at the window. Complete and utter miss. I don't know, throw your hammer at this point, Michael. I'm fairly certain we're done with it. Michael then mandates the player to get on their hands and knees and search the floors for the very same pebble. Again, no other will do. We find it on the landing going down the stairs, take aim, and fire off another round, much harder than before. Hit. The window shatters open, and an eager beam of light pierces into the dusty crypt. Now we can read the name. Just kidding. The placard is still in the basement, where there are no windows to speak of. Before I reveal to you the intended solution, how about I first tell you all the things which I would have sooner done to read this plaque? Light a little torch in the crackling fireplace and bring it to the basement of the crypt. Use my screwdriver to take off the plaque and bring it into the light. Use my pencil and a piece of paper from my notebook to take a rubbing of the plaque and then bring it upstairs. Fools, all of you. Totally unprompted. The correct solution is to go back into the house, use your screwdriver on a tiny handheld mirror in Mrs. Blackwood's bedroom, and take the mirror down to the crypt, and use it to reflect the light coming through the ceiling toward the plaque. You know, like the ancient Egyptians did. By the light of the twice refracted sun, we guide the beam across the wall to the exact spot we need and bring the plaque into the light. The name is... R. What kind of moron redacts a tombstone? Was this kid in the CIA? Well, that's one letter down. And to be perfectly honest, the hard part is done. Everything else we need to infer the solution can be found in the same place, and we don't have to do any hocus-pocus rigmarole with any of the items in our inventory to find it. Michael takes his thrill-seeker entrance back into the nursery that was built for R, and has another good look around. Remember when I said there wasn't much to see in here? I lied. Kicked aside in the corner of the room is an array of letter blocks that one of the parents had been preparing for the child that never was. Each block has a corresponding number on it, so that you can teach your toddler algebra, I'm sure, and in the bin with the rest of them, you can clearly see the number corresponding to R. But how are we supposed to discern the rest of the presumably 5-letter name? Quite simply, actually. Someone has spelled it out for us. Helter-skeltered on the floor, we see the letters O, B, I, and N. Robin. 59097. And there we have it. The solution to what might be the most shrewd, hard-nosed puzzle I have ever seen. Even if you used a guide, give yourself a pat on the back. It's a triumph, I assure you. The key to the mystery very well may lie within this little cigar box. One wheel at a time, we scroll on the combination until the tumblers all click away. Success! Michael delicately handles the lid and thumbs it open, revealing... nothing. I'm just kidding. It's a puzzle box with a false bottom. Buried in the box's secret compartment are some little coppers and coins, and some kinds of money which I don't recognize. Though I like to think they're souvenirs from James's stay in South Africa. But most important of all, there is a key in the box. A grand, glimmering skeleton key, with a crucifix forged into the handle. There's only one place that this could take us. The chapel is a modest building that is held up better than the others on the property. Inside, we are met with an immediate swell of a ghostly choir, and a distant crucifix looms over the empty pews. I began to sniff around the altar, peering into the ornate tabernacle and other fixtures of the Eucharist. This wasn't just some private house of prayer, but seemed to have once been a fully functional chapel where Mass was said. I began to wonder why I'd never heard of a priest character in this game. Maybe the chapel had already existed on the grounds before Blackwood built the house. Alternatively, it could be that Blackwood had built this church, or at least modified it in several ways. Though he had become deathly afraid of some ancient, evil curse, he never struck me as a God-fearing man. And a find in the choir loft above the pews further proved this point. A desecrated Bible. Concealed in the good book was yet another hidden compartment, where a shining, 7-inch nail had been hiding. Oh man. Back behind the altar, I noticed that this was, in fact, one of the nails that belonged in the crucifix, which had been removed for some reason. A closer look around the altar even revealed a fake floor right where the priest stood, though further descent was blocked by some machination. Sorry, buddy. A mechanical click found the nail in its place. With the key intact, one other detail presented itself as slightly off. The INRI sign was crooked. A dark, misty aperture had now opened beneath the altar. Of every room that James Blackwood had tucked away, this was, without a doubt, the one which had been hidden with the most care. Caution to the wind, I lowered myself into the secret antechamber. It's so damn dark in here. I can make out a light switch on the ceiling, but there's no electricity here, just like the main house. Wait, is that? Could it be? A candle. It seems that we have uncovered James's secret occult phenomenon research club. He seems to have spent a lot of time in here, urgently skirting away ledger after ledger, and my god, was he really smoking in here too? Immediately on the desk, I found a strange, warped piece of wood that called out to me. Michael pocketed it before picking up a piece of paper that might become the single most important read of the game. James has now become the leading scholar of Dalmar history out of probably the entire world. He has traced their lineage 20,000 years and linked them to the Bushmen of South Africa, a nearly prehistoric civilization. He calls them the product of 200 years of cannibalism and inbreeding, and he hesitates to classify them as humans. Blackwood corroborates that their entire folklore and tradition all revolve around horrific rituals like the ones he witnessed, which are all for the purpose of keeping some ancient evil at bay, something which has been stalking them since their tribe's inception. The further I read into this account, more chills I began to feel creep down my spine, and I began to understand the otherworldly peril we were in. Blackwood identified the evil spirit as a vengeful god which the tribe called the Lam. It was said to appear in many incarnations, but most prominently as a towering, deadly, anthropomorphic cat beast that lived in the shadows and leapt out at unsuspecting tribefolk, mutilating them with claws which were said to pierce the body and soul alike. He then recounts from an esoteric history that the Dalmar managed to free themselves from this evil spirit by conducting a ritual revolving around an amulet that the tribesmen smithed. Two main elements were required to perform the exorcising of this evil, and they had to be strictly related to each other, one representing the victim and the other representing the victimizer. Next, these elements had to be mixed with a rare medicinal plant native to the region, which apparently had the properties to blend both items together. And then finally, all elements must be fused to a branch of a sacred tree whose name escapes me now. It should be noted that all elements of this ritual had to be organic. The Dalmar successfully released themselves from the control of this vicious god with an intense ritual that seems to have taken days to perform. In the end, the amulet was so powerful that the entity surrendered to their will and offered divine power in exchange for sacrifices. But the Dalmar wouldn't allow to be fooled. They decided that getting rid of this evil once and for all would be the wisest thing to do, so they managed to capture its spirit and store it someplace where they could guard it for ages to come. My god. The evil spirit was cast into a mask, trapped inside the confines of its blessed wood for eternity. A mask whose description bears an uncanny resemblance to... Who am I fooling? It is that mask. The Dalmar would keep the spirit at bay via regular rituals involving the bloody sacrifices of an aforementioned amulet. One of the most horrific details of all is what James unearthed as to why the Dalmar were so violent to outsiders and had in the past slaughtered entire villages. Their prime motivation was fear. Fear that someone would take that mask and release the god. They killed to protect themselves from falling again into the Dark Ages. If they went to such extreme lengths to avoid this, then what did they have to endure when the entity was free? The rituals haven't been performed on the mask in years now. What have I done? What have I done? I was shocked to learn about this evil. Terrible as it was, I wondered what lengths James Blackwood went to get rid of the curse. The other letter on the desk will answer just that. It is a desperate, frantic plea to Christopher that he must consult the history Blackwood has written on the desk and complete the ritual in the event something happens to James. Openly, James says to Christopher, "Do not hesitate. There is simply no other way, and you would be the only one left who can do it. Promise me. Promise me you will. I know I'm asking you to become a cold-hearted murderer, but Christopher, our lives, and possibly many others are at stake. Isn't that enough to forget your vow?" That settles it. Blackwood just asked Christopher to murder someone in the event that he couldn't. I think we know what happened to Catherine now. And, of course, Christopher never believed a thing which James told him, so his plea fell on deaf ears. So it seems the ritual was never conducted. Blackwood was dead by some means or another before he could confront the evil he had stolen from the Dalmar's care. And that very same evil had been left to fester in this house for well over a decade now. It comes to us in our dreams and torments us with whispers, the same way it did to Christopher Milton before us. But he was not strong enough to honor his friend's plea, even after the hard part had been done and Catherine was in the ground. And now there's only one person left who can undo the damage that James Blackwood caused. And that would be Michael Arthate. Now we really are living one of his books. We must prepare the ritual as James Blackwood dictated it. True to what he said, 4 elements are required. 2 are the yin and yang, a symbol of the oppressor and a symbol of the victim, both which must come from an organic origin. Then we require a leaf from a special plant with rare medicinal properties. And finally, a special branch from a sacred tree. Where on earth am I going to find these things in Rothbury? As it happens, we have one down. The strange, warped piece of wood lying here on the desk. It must be the branch from the sacred tree Michael mentioned. Why else would it be in his inner sanctum? And then, suddenly, the next piece fell into place too. The strange potted plant in the greenhouse. Surely it wasn't there by chance. A trip back to the greenhouse and a snip of our hedge clippers provided us with a small sample of the plant. There's another one down. The symbol of the oppressor was a bit more difficult to find, and a guide helped me to track it down to the gallery upstairs. It was a lion's claw, made into the centerpiece of a necklace. All that was left was an emblem of the victim, the most challenging and unethical element, as according to Blackwood, the thing required a murder to take place. But then I recalled, if the stories were to be believed, that Blackwood had already done the hard part for me. It was getting late in the afternoon, and the sun had cast a shadow from the tallest spire down onto the garden where nothing grew. Comparing it to the photograph the maid took of the crime, we were able to determine the exact spot where Mrs. Blackwood was buried. With the shovel from the greenhouse, we began the grim dig. I was equally terrified and saddened upon uncovering the dead body of Catherine Blackwood. What disturbed me most were the teeth leaping out at me from all those angles. If this is Catherine's body, then it must be James who's buried in the crypt. He really is dead. But if that's the case, then what did we see in the furnace last night? Doing my best to contain my repulsion, I pulled out a tooth from the body. I quietly left, burying Mrs. Blackwood to her cold, dead dreams. The evening sun is disappearing behind the trees. We are ready to conduct the ritual. We take these objects to a grinder in the kitchen, and one by one crush them all into a fine powder. The sound of her tooth being pulverized by the hand crank machine is among the most disturbing moments to me in this entire game. We do the same to the lion's claw and combine them with the clump of leaves. Then, we are upstairs to the camp stove, a little thing which was left behind by the construction crew. We give it a light and lay the items atop the paint lid we took from the studio. Michael torches the ingredients by the flame of the stove, melding them all into a little green amalgam. Instantaneously, something has happened to the sound. A slow, hollow wind fills the air, gently blowing back and forth. It's almost like breathing, whispering. We attach the fused elements to the sacred branch. It nestles perfectly into a crevice between the hinter branches, almost like it was made for this express purpose. Now the improvised scepter is complete. But will it work? On a light, trembling step, we descend from the third floor and approach the gallery. As we do, the hollow and eerie wind lets slip a disgusting, insidious laughter. It bounces off the walls, amused by something, and it becomes a modicum louder with every step we take toward the gallery. The mask hasn't moved. Nothing about it has changed. It lies motionless, silent, and eyeless, but still feels as though it's staring right into us. I can't help but think that it should recognize the amulet in my hand as the same thing which condemned it to its prison all those years ago. Yet, the laughter persists. What is this joke that we're not in on? Michael takes the improvised amulet, holds it out at arm's length, and waves it from side to side, right across the spiritual prison. And then, there was no ghostly shriek of surprise, just a cease in that laughter. Did it work? As the music develops into an angelic choir, we at last understand. This terrible, frightening, tragic story has finally come to its end. And even if Michael's actions have only led to a temporary... I stood there, paralyzed in terror, as I heard those horrible noises again. They just wouldn't stop. For a moment, I was actually disappointed at the prospect of the game letting me off so easy. Now I just wish that it had. As I went down the fireplace, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had entered a forbidden zone. A place that had been, and was supposed to remain, forgotten in time. I think we've now found James Blackwood's final and most secret of secret passageways. We can even spy into the old decrepit furnace from the other side of this wall, which means directly behind us. The first thing to jump out at me in this room were the scraps of gristle and shreds of meat that littered the floor and foul-stained table. A grated window on the far wall had a telltale slick of blood running down the side, suggesting that that was where the victuals were regularly delivered. The second thing to jump out at me in this room was an old teddy bear on the floor, thoroughly chewed and ripped at the seams. It was then that Michael remembered an especially unsavory detail from a phone call we shared earlier with Chief William Bailey regarding the maid's account of Mrs. Blackwood's death wound. Ripped, she would say. And the third thing that jumped out at me in this room
Unsure of what I had just seen, I raced my car and left Blackwood Manor as quickly as possible. I'm not ashamed of what I did. That disfigured face is still stalking my nightmares, and I've never put foot inside a Victorian house ever since. But there's certainly one thing that I'm grateful for. It was thanks to my encounter below that house that I was able to finish my book and become a prolific writer.
Before we carve up everything that just happened, there's one final moment I must share with you. I find this choice of ending screen very interesting. So, that is how the story of Scratches ends. Or rather, I'd prefer if it was, as this game also features an epilogue and secret ending. I will make the clarification that of the 3 perceived endings to the story, this one is by far the favorite of this game's fans, and probably my favorite too. It makes a point of not answering everything by the end, and instead leaves things slightly murky, an approach which I prefer to the alternative of putting too fine a point on things. Unfortunately, both the epilogue and the secret ending do just that. They remove all ambiguity that one could enjoy in interpreting this game, and instead give very clear-cut, irrefutable, boring answers, which is why I'd prefer to consider them not canon. Don't worry, for the sake of thoroughness, I will show you both of these endings. But first, I'm going to try and dissect the events of the vanilla game so that we can enjoy speculating and theorizing together before these 2 alternate conclusions come in and spoil the fun. First off, that fellow in the basement with the kitty cat eyes. This is none other than Robin Blackwood, the presumed dead child of James and Catherine Blackwood. It seems that he was born to some sort of hideous deformity which James and Catherine were too ashamed to let the rest of the world know about. So, like the great parents they were, they had Christopher Milton fake the death of their newborn child, and then raised him from the secrecy of a dungeon they built beneath their living room. It is a terribly dark twist. Evidence I've placed on the screen confirms that the maid never knew about Robin. His existence was kept a secret between James, Catherine, and Christopher, our murder trust. This now gives way to the next question, something which I've spent a good long while puzzling over. Theory 1. Who killed Catherine Blackwood? After uncovering James's secret anti-Dolan protection chamber beneath the chapel, we learn that James did have a reluctant, yet horrible motive to murder his wife, and even told Christopher to do it in his stead in the event that he could not. But then, at the very end of the game in that terrible room under the house, we find a teddy bear with its neck ripped open. Michael then recalls what must be a very deliberate, poignant detail, that the maid described Catherine's mortal wound as her neck having been ripped open. This, of course, implies that it was Robin who killed his own mother, a happy accident seeing as James was fixing to anyways. But Robin killing Catherine is commonly refuted by players of this game because of one solitary detail that destroys all credibility that the theory has. When Catherine was murdered in 1963, Robin would have been 2 years old. Surely this totally invalidates the theory, meaning that it must have been James who killed his wife. But, after careful consideration, I am now not only certain that Robin was the killer, but through use of context clues left in the game environment, I believe I know exactly how it went down. We need to figure out just what Robin Blackwood is, and in order to do this, we're going to do what all great theorists do: make an assumption. I think I know what inspired Augustine to write the character of Robin, and that would be 2 stories written by your boy, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Now first, I just want to say I am not accusing Augustine of stealing ideas or copying or anything like that. Authors influence each other. Inspiration is merely the process of natural selection in writing, where good ideas will be passed on to other writers, and bad ideas will go no further than the pages where they are written. So again, I am not accusing Augustine of stealing ideas, I just believe that these 2 works inspired him. Not only does he include several works of his in James Blackwood's library, but Michael Arthate himself is supposed to be H.P. Lovecraft. The 2 of them even come from Providence, Rhode Island. Here, I will make the first assumption. I think Augustin Cordes has read a good deal of Lovecraft's work, specifically 2 of his stories, The Outsider and The Dunwich Horror. The Outsider is a shorter story about a man who has lived his whole life locked in a castle, finally escaping and experiencing daylight and seeing other people for the first time. The whole story is very reminiscent of Plato's allegory of the cave, which I won't be getting into in this video. The second story, Dunwich Horror, is a good deal longer, but I'm only interested in the first chapter, where we are introduced to young Wilbur Whately. Wilbur's parents are a curious lot to begin with. His mother is an albino, and his father is described as a half-insane wizard, but these details don't even account for half the abnormality of Wilbur himself. Wilbur is reputed to have begun speaking at the ripe old age of 11 months, and his speech is noted to be free from infantile lisping. By age 10, Wilbur is described as having a mature face, stature of a grown man, and a full beard. And then, when he is no older than 12, Wilbur apparently stands 6'9", showing no sign of his growth slowing down. It becomes pretty clear early on in Dunwich that Wilbur's development is being altered by some unseen force, causing him to grow at a scarily fast pace. Combine this with the Outsider's character, and I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. I propose that Robin Blackwood is written to be a fusion of these two characters, Wilbur Whately from the Dunwich Horror, and the Castle Dweller from the Outsider. Robin is visibly abnormal, rapidly maturing, and mentally decayed after years of living in captivity. And if the Dunwich Horror isn't enough to convince you, then I might go ahead and add that the main game of Scratches takes place in 1975, meaning that this Robin Blackwood who attacks us in the secret basement is only 14 years old. That thing looks much older than 14. With this accelerated aging established, I want you to imagine what this thing might have looked like when it was 2 years old, at the time of Catherine's death. If we're right to assume that Augustine drew inspiration from Lovecraft's Dunwich Horror, then it stands to reason that Robin Blackwood was capable of committing a murder at 2 years old. And finally, using context clues of where items in the game can be found, I think I can piece together what Catherine's death, and maybe even the final moments which led up to it, looked like. The entire linchpin to this theory is the environmental significance of the letter found in James's locked desk drawer, the one written from Christopher to Catherine, where he warns Catherine to stay away from James. Whether or not it reached Catherine first, James no doubt found this letter and read it. What I think happened next is all speculation, of course, but the more I go over it in my head, the more inclined I am to believe it is the intended subtext of the game. James reads this letter and learns that his wife may have been informed of his intentions. He has been betrayed by his best friend Christopher, and he understands now that time is running out. He locks the letter in his desk, as it would no doubt incriminate him in her murder, and then runs off to find Catherine, either to come clean with her about the situation, or to enact the murder that he's been planning. Let's assume Catherine has read the letter, and knows full well that James is dangerous. She needs to get out of the house, and she's grabbing whatever possessions she thinks are essential to her escape, when she comes to the natural and rational conclusion to take her child with her. She storms down to the cellar to take Robin, who we've established is probably larger, feistier, and more cognizant than your average toddler, and then makes for the exit. But then, sometime in the brief span of a minute between Catherine picking up her child and running out of the house, James catches up to her and confronts her. She can tell by the wild look in his eye that he's desperate, and might well be dangerous to her and her child, like Milton said. James calls out to her, but Catherine cries, "Stay back," and holds her child close, like a mother does 1,000 times, right next to her neck. Robin strikes. Immediately after, James probably wrenched the little monster from his wife's dying figure, hurled it back downstairs into his dungeon, and then proceeded with a hasty burial in the garden. Mrs. Mariani takes a snapshot of the burial, and the rest is history. And that was my theory as to how Catherine died. Robin killed her when she grabbed the child in an attempt to escape. Theory number 2 is to how, when, and where James Blackwood died. True to what the lore said, I believe James died not long after Catherine. I think that he was forward with Christopher about what happened to her, and Christopher must have believed him, or else he wouldn't have felt safe hanging around James. The police came and tried to sniff away, but James's influence was able to repel their investigation. James knew that with all these eyes on him, he wouldn't be able to complete the ritual to ward off the evil spirit, especially with Mrs. Blackwood's body having to be exhumed yet again to make it happen. For several weeks, he probably suffered from constant nerves and fear, wondering who would get him first, the police or Dolam. Eventually, he probably decided he'd rather face prison time rather than that anthropomorphic cat monster slowly animating in his gallery. So, he left for the greenhouse, likely to gather the leaves needed from that tree, when he was struck by a sudden but long-provoked heart attack and dropped dead right in the middle of the greenhouse. There are 2 reasons why I think James died here. 1. we find the key to this locked drawer in the gutter, something which he must have kept on his person at all times, seeing as the drawer that it opened contained both the incriminating letter from Christopher to Catherine and the key to the chapel, where even more incriminating evidence could be found. And 2, the ending screen of the game that the credits rolled over. I told you this was an interesting choice for a credit screen, and after weighing all the clues, I think that this screen is showing us the exact spot where James Blackwood died. Later on, when we consult the secret ending, I'll have another piece of evidence to support this too. Christopher, no doubt, then found the body, conducted a very lonely funeral, never recovered Catherine's corpse, and then kept a promise to the Blackwoods that he would look after their demented little demon child, Robin. There is one last detail attached to the James Blackwood story, which greatly changed my perception of things, and, in fact, further vindicated my view that Robin was the killer. The reason I share this last is because it is not something that I figured out on my own. Thanks to the channel Play Zodi, who just made a video called Scratch's Story Explained, where he logically answers all of the major questions in the game, with the canon answers, I learned a major missing puzzle piece of James's late game motivation. Do you guys remember that letter under the chapel where James outright asks Christopher to murder Catherine? It seems I was a bit hasty in my assumption there. James never outright says the name Catherine in his desperate plea to Milton. He doesn't even say she or her. All he says is, you must do it and become a murderer. While the pronoun game is usually a grating and overused trope, where a character refuses to say someone's name and instead just says he or it for the sake of delaying a reveal, this was actually a very intelligent use of it, because it totally worked on me. James wasn't asking Christopher to kill Catherine at all. He was begging him to kill Robin. Here we can assume a lot of things about James. He must have preferred Robin to be the sacrifice required for the ritual, but he also must have thought that Robin was dangerous and needed to be dealt with. Clearly, he was right. And clearly, Christopher never went through with it. This now leads us to Theory 3, what happened to Christopher? Christopher Milton was probably the most difficult loose end to tie up. But after much speculation, I think that I've come up with 2 solid theories as to what caused him to leave Blackwood Manor. We know that Christopher knew about Robin. He was the presiding doctor at the child's birth and helped fake its death. We also know that Christopher did not believe James's stories about the mask until enough years went by and he began to hear whispers and voices coming from the hallway. These slowly drove him insane, until he abandoned the house in what I believe was a very dramatic fashion. But these 2 things weren't enough to fill in all the gaps in the story where he mysteriously disappeared, per what Jerry said. Funny enough, the key to both of these theories is, in fact, a key. Do you guys remember that whole key sticking out of the door hullabaloo that I got so up in arms over in the first video? First off, I would like to apologize and rescind my criticism of that puzzle. Being generally new to adventure games, I was totally unaware that this was a famous trope of adventure games of the era, and that for a 2006 horror game to not only include this puzzle, but also have it not work is perfectly appropriate for the tone of the game, and is actually quite hilarious. In short, I thought that the developer was completely trolling me. Which is still pretty funny. But I'm still glad that I spent the time addressing this scenario, because your comments leading me to re-examine that puzzle have revealed a tremendously important question that I can't believe I didn't ask the first time around. Who locked this door? Obviously, it was Christopher. We know that both Catherine and James are long dead at this juncture, so it's a sure shot that Christopher was the only one coming in and out of this room. We can also assume that he was the one who enjoyed painting, and that this was his studio where he probably passed a lot of time. But why did he lock the door from the inside? I give you Theory 1. I think that Christopher was painting in his studio one day when suddenly he heard those whispers coming from the gallery again. Maybe they were louder than before. Maybe they sounded angrier. Maybe he even heard footsteps and feared that worst had come to worst. That the angry god that James had warned him about had finally materialized and come to seek a victim. So, Christopher locked himself in the studio, and jammed the other door attached to it shut. It should be noted that this door is still jammed upon our arrival to Blackwood Manor, so we know that Christopher didn't then leave through either door. He was locked in this room, terrified of something downstairs in the house. What was he to do? One curious item we find in the room attached to the studio suggests a grim option. Christopher was going to hang himself. It looks like he began to seriously consider this avenue, being that we found the rope slung over a crossbeam, but no noose has been tied. I believe that before he went through with it, Christopher thought of Robin, and the promise he had made to the Blackwoods to look after their son. He knew that if he was gone, there'd be no one to look after that thing in the dungeon, and worse yet, the thing in the gallery might get to him. So, Christopher, with no other choices about him, quietly and carefully left the house through the window attached to the studio, and never set foot inside it again. Some people have already raised the question, though, that this window is entirely too small, which maybe it is, but if that's too small for your theory, then perhaps you'd like theory number 2. Theory number 2 occurred to me later on, and I must say is more logical, funnier, and, in hindsight, quite creepy. And that's that Christopher Milton was in the house the whole time. I don't know what he was doing, maybe painting, honestly, but Milton must have been on the 2nd or 3rd floor of the house when he heard the door open as Michael arrived on day 1. Milton wouldn't have known who it was, and probably ran upstairs and locked himself in the studio and hoped that we would let ourselves out. But we didn't. The craziest thing about this theory is that it totally justifies the inclusion of the puzzle I once thought was so bogus, because it reveals the truth of it. Christopher Milton was on the other side of that door, terrified that we would get in and discover the secret of this house and share it with the world. I wouldn't be surprised if he actually picked up the key as soon as it landed on the newspaper to ensure we wouldn't get in, which makes this puzzle even more fucking hilarious. But where is Christopher Milton by day 2 of the game, you say, when we finally get inside the gallery? Simple. He waited for us to fall asleep on day 1, then carefully and quietly unlocked the door, let himself out, locked it again, and then tiptoed out of the house. After that, I actually think Christopher anonymously contacted the authorities or real estate people or whoever to tell them, hey, I didn't actually sell my fucking house to this guy, which is ultimately the reason why we get evicted on day 3. Milton was trying to get us out of that house as fast as possible for our own good, because he knew that Robin was in that improvised dungeon and that sooner or later we would meet. Remember that slick of blood running down the wall in the cellar, and all the scraps of meat at the bottom? That's where Christopher was feeding Robin every day. There's even a receipt in the attic, which I totally glossed over, for an industrial shipment of meat, so we know that this was going on for a long time. Whether or not he actually lives in the Blackwood house, Christopher has been visiting it for years, possibly every day, so that he can feed Robin and prevent him from starving. This is regardless of which theory regarding the locked door you subscribe to. All we know for sure is that Michael impeded Christopher's ability to feed Robin, so Robin became hungry and desperate and began clawing his way out of the basement, tunneling up to the surface like a shrew. For how long he had been working on this, we don't know, but it's a safe bet that this is what the scratching sound was. Robin Blackwood digging his way out of the dungeon. And in this endgame cutscene, we see he finally manages to escape. And there ends the speculation for the base game of Scratches. I'm happy with the theories that I have crafted, even though I know they're not perfect, and I'd be especially happy to hear any of your counterpoints or alternative theories you may have come up with on your own. If you want to do some theorizing, now is the time to do it, because now we're going to take a look at the alternate endings, which will effectively come and kick over our sandcastle. Let's go ahead and get it out of the way. The bonus chapter, The Last Visit. I do not like Scratch's The Last Visit. For one thing, we don't even get to play as Michael Arthate. We're some British journalist who's doing a story on the Blackwood house. The Last Visit begins with us talking to our editor in what is a very heavy-handed dose of exposition.
Rumors and madness.
Michael Arthate supposedly solved the Blackwood enigma, but for some reason never shared his solution. Perhaps I could persuade him.
You can forget about that. Mr. Arthate rarely speaks to the press, and less so about this story. Not even the most experienced and reputed reporters in the field have convinced him to talk.
Apparently, Michael Arthate hasn't said anything about what happened to the Blackwood house, and Jerry went to prison for 8 years for fraud. The Jerry thing is a bit of a bummer, but Michael never telling anyone about what happened at the Blackwood house is absurd. The man is a storyteller. You mean to tell me that that was just a story he didn't feel like telling? The reporter gets sent on an assignment to go snoop around the Blackwood house with a tape recorder and try to uncover the mystery of the Blackwoods, and boy howdy does the voice acting take a dive here.
The whole place is exhibiting signs of vandalism and trashing.
Our once cozy and spooky home is now Skid Row. Furniture has been smashed to pieces and strewn about the floor. Where the wallpaper isn't peeling, it's been spattered with graffiti. And even the rooms that once held some terrifying presence over us have now been devastated by trespassers who had no reverence or knowledge of the wicked things once kept there. I'd really prefer not to dwell on every little detail of The Last Visit. Every time the journalist walks into a room, he pushes his glasses up his nose and says something stupid and contrived.
Aha, plot thickens.
I'd like to gloss over all these observations and skip right to the end, but unfortunately, there is one thing that the journalist finds that I strongly dislike. Tucked away in a drawer in Catherine Blackwood's room are some pill bottles, which, to be fair, were there in the base game too. Although in the base game, when Michael looks in this drawer, he doesn't say anything. But when fucking Glasses Emoji looks at it, he says,
A bottle of thalidomide.
"Are you fucking serious? Thalidomide?" Yes, thalidomide was an over-the-counter medication that caused horrible birth defects in children, and it was in circulation around the time Mrs. Blackwood was pregnant. But it didn't do that to kids. The inclusion of this item doesn't prove or disprove anything, but boy does it just irk me. Many now believe that Robin was just a thalidomide baby and had no supernatural impact on his development. Something which, as I'm sure you can tell, I vehemently disagree with. But I digress. There's a couple more strange choices in the last visit. The journalist finds the dungeon and says it reeks of cat piss, and then he looks into the death pit from the end of Scratches and literally sees a pair of eyes glaring back at him. But he assumes it's just a cat. And the cat doesn't attack him. Weird. Then he scoops up a pail of water and pours it down the hole we saw dug out at the end of Scratches, and the cat runs away, leaving him with a doorknob that opens the bathroom on the second floor. I don't really know why they decided to make the climax of the last visit take place in this bathroom. It seems like they just thought nothing happened here in the regular game, so let's use it now. The journalist goes into the bathroom and pulls back the shower curtain, and egads, the evil mask is taking a bath. I don't know. Then the journo steps out of the room, the scary basement music starts playing again, and he goes back to look in there, and suddenly... Oh no, it's Robin Blackwood! Or Dolam. Run for your lives, The rest of the last visit is a cutscene that nobody asked for, complete with some much less suave voice acting, and the animation quality of 7-year-old me playing with my action figures. Yes, I know I shouldn't dunk on an old game for having old graphics, but something that Scratches did very well up until this point was hiding its limitations by very sparsely portraying movement. Even the final jump scare in the basement aged really well, successfully maintaining the illusion. But this cutscene is just too much. Robin tackles the journalist over the banister and he falls down the stairs into the foyer. Robin jumps down on top of him when... By God, it's Christopher Milton with a steel chair!
Who are you? What are you doing here? Can't you see this place is dangerous? Robin, please forgive me. I had to see you before I returned to my dying bed.
Robin tackles Christopher and probably kills him. I don't care. It's really just a giant mess of an epilogue, and I'd rather have not included it in the first place, but I figured Jons would have at least liked to know about it, so there. The one black mark on this awesome game. The biggest takeaway from the last visit that everyone talks about is definitely the thalidomide bottle. How that affects your interpretation of the story, I leave up to you, though it is the largest piece of evidence that is commonly cited in the theory that there was no curse after all. Regardless, I don't like this ending because it answers questions that were better left unanswered. Let this be a lesson to all you storytellers out there. Too many open ends and you've got cow tools. A frustrating and nebulous story where no amount of speculation can make proper sense of it. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you answer everything, then your story will suffer an even worse fate. Absolute completion. When people stop wondering about your story, they stop caring about it too. Which is why it's best to never give them those final puzzle pieces, and instead let them fill in the blanks themselves. Little things like the thalidomide bottle seriously damage, if not completely remove, the player's ability to speculate. And that is why I would sooner accept the secret ending over the last visit. My preferring the secret ending over the epilogue might come as a shock to the three of you out there who actually know what it is, seeing as it arguably puts an even finer point on things than the last visit. I hadn't even seen this ending until I began making the second video, and I can safely say it was the right call to make this ending so well buried, ensuring that most players won't get it on a first playthrough. The alternate ending is as follows. In the secret passage beneath the fireplace, Michael discovers a skeleton, and beside it, a sad and revealing ledger. This is the body of James Blackwood, and the note is his confession. He says that the ritual did not stop the whispers, and he killed everyone himself. It was all just some horrible psychosis. He claims to have murdered Catherine and left her in the garden, and he even says he subdued Christopher Milton and sealed him alive in his own crypt. The most telling of all, James mourns Robin, saying, "First my son, then Catherine, and Milton." First my son. So in this ending, Robin Blackwood died before anyone else, meaning he probably did die in childbirth. And following the other two murders, James locked himself in the cellar to wallow in his sorrow and die, not wanting to hurt anybody else. There was no curse, only insanity, and everyone died by his hand. As Michael puts down the letter, he's overwhelmed with tears. But I wasn't crying for Blackwood. I was crying for myself. I had it in me too. It was the only explanation. I had lost my mind. As he leaves the sad little dungeon, he says to himself, I left it there in Blackwood Manor forever. Michael drives off. Most telling of all, there is no endgame monologue where he talks about writing his new book and becoming a prolific writer. It just goes right to credits. And at that, an entirely different batch of credits with a different song and without the shot of the greenhouse. The fact that the ending where we see James Blackwood's skeleton in the cellar doesn't have the mysterious shot of the greenhouse makes me even more inclined to believe that the screen is supposed to imply that it is where James died in the vanilla ending. This ending has been absolutely retconned, and is considered by most to be nothing more than a secret, bonus, what-if ending. And I'd like to consider it not canon too, because the original ending is much stronger, much scarier, and much more enjoyable than this sad, sudden, disappointing sandbag of a conclusion. But there's something very, very interesting about the secret ending, which I have withheld up until this point, and that is the means by which you acquire it. To get this sad, undesired ending, all you need to do is keep on trying to write. Every time you make an advancement in the game's story, the game provides you with a new opportunity to click on the typewriter upstairs, and to encourage Michael to do some writing. This can occur at 12 different occasions throughout the game, and to get the secret ending, you must confront him with his procrastination all 12 times. Each time you click on the typewriter, Michael writes something in his diary to the effect of him suffering writer's block. They start out benign, just Michael saying he's more interested in exploring the house than working on his book. But over time, they become more obsessive and concerning. We see Michael become frustrated with his writing, and worse, become discouraged from writing the further we push him. The 12th and final entry he writes, which unlocks the secret ending, is terribly revealing. I am not Michael Arthate. He used to be a great writer. But me? I can't write. Not anymore. Michael then goes into the basement and uncovers an anticlimactic and disappointing ending to the mystery. He leaves the house and doesn't mention anything about finishing his book. It's safe to assume that he never writes again. Out of every tragedy that we've seen occur in the Blackwood house, this one hurts me the most. As a writer, creative block is a scary thing, but there's nothing more terrifying than the idea that someday you'll lose your passion altogether. And that's exactly what happens in this ending of the game. Michael gives up on his career. But most important of all, I think that this secret ending is the last clue we needed to really crack what Scratches is all about. Why do you suppose it is that we get this outcome from pressuring Michael to write? Why is it that when we force him to sit down and be creative, the ending sucks, but when we let him roam free and explore, the ending is much more exciting and scary? Because, true to what I said at the beginning of the first video, we are living Michael's next book. And the ending to this book is decided by whether Michael finds the inspiration he's looking for, or if his writer's block burns him out first. In other words, I think the secret ending is what really happened. The truth is only revealed once we've thoroughly strangled Michael's creativity, by scraping his head against the typewriter. In the good ending, Michael probably still finds James's dead body in the cellar, but that's not what he tells us, his readers. Instead, Michael tells us a fantastic and thrilling end to the story, one that solidifies his career as a master of horror. Because that's what good writers do. They don't get discouraged when real life fails to tell the story for them. Instead, they take real life and turn it into something intriguing and exciting. To be clear, this is all just my interpretation, but it's led me to believe that almost none of the game is true. The whole game is a series of embellishments that Michael Arthate put into his book to make it a better story than the one which the secret ending gives us. Ordinarily, I positively despise the "it was all a dream" or "nothing was real" trope. And even as I first began to consider this theory, I wanted to reject it completely. But at the end of this video, I think I can accept that two things can be true at the same time. and that buried in the subtext of this legendary horror adventure, there is a very real allegory of the writer and his writing. Most of the people who play this game will fight my interpretation, and the events that occur in the last visit will certainly prove them right. And maybe it's better that way. I still do agree that the vanilla ending is much more enjoyable. Don't ask me how I know this, but I heard a quote once by a sword fighting performer who was explaining to a crowd how to hold a sword properly. To paraphrase, he said something to the extent of, "A sword is like a bird. If you hold it too tight, it dies. If you hold it too loose, it flies away." This saying is adjacent to the message that I've extracted from Scratches. Creativity is like a bird. If you try to force it, it will die. And if you let go of it for too long, it may never come back. And funny enough, there really are two bad endings that players can achieve which embody both of these. The secret ending where Michael finds the disappointing truth, and an ending which I'm afraid too many players have gotten over the years, becoming stumped or bored and not finishing the game. Only through perseverance, contemplation, perspiration, and, most importantly, rest, Michael finds the muse he is looking for. Regardless of who murdered who and what evil mask cursed what tribe, only one thing determines if Michael finishes his book: his willingness to accept inspiration. Well, this has been a larger project scope than what I intended when I set out to make the first video, but now it is done and I'm pleased with where it's ended. I'm only one fella, and these are just my opinions, and I'm eagerly awaiting the firestorm in the comments over which ending is the truth and which ones are false. Your bonus question this time is the problem of alternate endings. Who has the final say over which ending is canon? The author or the reader? I thought I loved this game when I made part 1, but now I see that there's a lot that I didn't know. I didn't even get around to talking about the paintings in this video, something which the theorists in the community of this game cite all the time when they start conspiring. Especially that one. I hope to put out a video essay of similar caliber to this one on a near monthly basis, though I will continue to upload intermittent playthroughs of games that interest me in the meantime. I also have a real job and a real life that I have to be tending to as well, so I'm sure you'll understand if my little hobby here goes radio silent for a spell. Thank you all for your extremely valuable time. Now go out and make the next Scratches, so curious people like us can fall in love with it. Be well, and vote for Holt.